Hello everyone, my name is Gaurav Srivastav. I am a planner and urban designer and I direct the urban design practice at Dudek, a planning and design firm based in California. I have worked in Southern California for the last 15 years, primarily with local cities on developing plans that address downtown development, transit districts, and housing production. I also teach urban design to graduate students at UCLA's Luskin School of Public Policy, where I am a visiting lecturer. In this presentation, we will discuss the foundations for city land use regulation, introduce tools jurisdictions can use to facilitate housing production, and compare and contrast common development review processes. Throughout this presentation, I will also highlight some common planning terms. While the focus of today's discussion will remain at the local, city scale, to begin with, we should acknowledge that cities in the United States ultimately derive their authority from their respective states. States are assigned constitutional powers to regulate activity and safeguard the health and safety of their residents. They assign this authority to incorporated cities like Fullerton, who then have the power of taxation and law enforcement, as well as that of regulating land use and development. The right of cities to regulate land use to safeguard health and safety was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1926 via a decision involving the village of Euclid in Ohio. That name retains a significance in current planning practice, and we will return to it later in this talk. In California, the state delegates most local land use and development decisions to cities and counties while still retaining ultimate authority to preempt local policies or mandate additional ones. It is with this authority that state law requires each incorporated city and county to adopt, for its physical development, a long-range plan called a general plan. The general plan serves as the overarching regulatory framework for a city's spatial and physical growth. Although the framework is set in state law, a general plan is sensitive to local issues and reflects the unique physical, economic, and demographic characteristics of the city. Each city's elected legislative body, in other words, the City Council, upon recommendation of their planning commission, adopts its general plan and implements it through its zoning, subdivision, and other ordinances. General plans are typically divided into chapters or elements covering different topics. 8 of these elements, the ones listed on the screen, are required to be included, but a general plan may also include other optional topics of local interest. Fullerton's general plan was last updated on a comprehensive basis in 2012. The general plan is a community's blueprint for future development and describes its development goals and policies. It contains a policy or written text component, as well as maps and diagrams that illustrate the allowed distribution of land uses, the circulation system, environmental hazard areas, the open space system, and other policy positions that can be illustrated. For the purposes of this discussion, the land use element is most relevant. A separate discussion on the housing element is available as part of this speaker series. One of the maps in the general plan is the land use plan. It is the overarching policy vision for a city's identity and economic activity. It designates the allowed location and intensity of citywide uses and activities. Together, these reflect the priorities for what kind of city the community aspires to be. For example, one that sets aside 90% of its land area for industrial use is very different from one that sets aside 90% for single-family residential use. As the general plan is a long-range plan, the land use plan maps out the desired future distribution of uses, regardless of what is on the ground today. It serves as a starting point for all land use decisions to determine consistency with the general plan. As you can see on the screen, Fullerton has a mix of planned uses identified as community development types, including housing, business, industry, open space, and educational uses. A city's zoning code serves as the primary regulatory framework for implementing its land use plan, shown on the previous slide. The zoning code is adopted by ordinance and included in the city's legally enforceable municipal code. It serves as the city's blueprint for how it grows and develops over time and is the single most impactful tool that cities have to shape their built form and public realm. In Fullerton, the zoning code is Title 15 of the Fullerton Municipal Code. As you can see on the left side of the slide, the zoning code describes numerous zone classifications and provides corresponding development standards for each. The zoning code is applied to each property. Zooming into downtown Fullerton, for example, one can see how each parcel is assigned a zoning classification which when cross-referenced with the language in the zoning code, describes the rules under which that land may be used and developed. The Fullerton zoning code is based predominantly on Euclidean zoning. Euclidean zoning is the traditional zoning approach that has been the norm for cities for the last 100 years. It is named for the town of Euclid, Ohio, that was the subject of the 1926 Supreme Court ruling that legalized zoning nationwide and that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. Euclidean zoning essentially creates single-use districts that are neatly organized across the city. It reflects an approach to planning that is grounded in height, setback, density, and floor area rules. Quality building design is often achieved through the additional application of design guidelines and subjective review processes, adding cost, time, and uncertainty to the development review. We will talk more about development review later in this presentation. There is also a cautionary note with respect to zoning. While zoning is understood to be a regulatory tool that promotes the health and safety of a community by regulating land use, its origins are also associated with racial and class segregation that go back a century. When explicit racial zoning was made illegal by the Supreme Court in 1917, private parties stepped up to enforce segregation through racial covenants on property deeds and mortgage lending restrictions. The 1968 Fair Housing Act finally banned racial discrimination in housing. So while race and class no longer explicitly shape cities, in practice, many Euclidean-based zoning codes continue to create income-based barriers through regulations on allowed residential uses or minimum lot sizes. This slide shows a comparison of the city's zoning map to household median income by census tract. The darker the green, the higher the median income. Generally, the census tracts with the higher median incomes are associated with larger lot single-family zoning and amenitized planned residential developments, while the lighter green to blue areas are associated with small lot single-family zoning or two- and multifamily zoned properties. These slides show a comparison of the city's zoning map to household tenure by census tract. Tenure is the term used to describe whether a household rents or owns their home. The darker the yellow, the more owners are in the census tract, while the darker the blue, the more renters are in the census tract. Generally, the single-family zoned areas have higher home ownership rates, while the two-family and multifamily zoned areas have more households that rent. Now I would like to talk about 5 land use tools jurisdictions have at their disposal and how each tool can facilitate the production of housing and also begin to address inequality in prior land use policy. As we talk about each one, you may see opportunities where several tools could be used together. Inclusionary zoning is a tool that is geared to facilitate the production of affordable housing. It is a clearly defined development regulation that requires that a certain percentage of a development be affordable. Essentially, the profit on the market rate units or the increase in land value offset the affordable requirement while still providing sufficient return on investment for a developer. Depending on the nature of the project, a market rate developer may build the units themselves or partner with an affordable housing developer who can meet this obligation. The companion to an inclusionary zoning ordinance is the establishment of an in lieu fee. This fee program provides flexibility to a developer to pay a fee rather than construct affordable units on site. In lieu fees create a funding source a city can use to support an affordable housing project at another location, as we talked about in Speaker Series number 2. The Fullerton Transportation Center specific plan encourages residential development to designate at least 15% of the units as affordable. However, the city does not currently have either an inclusionary zoning requirement or an in lieu fee program. A specific plan is a tool that is geared to facilitating the production of market rate and affordable housing, as well as other uses. Specific plans allow cities to focus in on a specific geographic area and develop regulations and code to respond to unique planning challenges or opportunities. A specific plan implements and must be consistent with the local general plan. Like land use plans and zoning ordinances, they describe allowable land uses and set development standards. However, they typically do so in more detail and in response to a unique set of planning issues. A specific plan can include areas where housing is appropriate, often providing for housing types and/or lot sizes not available under a city's Euclidean zoning-based code. Specific plans can also establish areas within the plan boundary where affordable housing is required. A specific plan could also have an inclusionary zoning requirement, including an in-lieu fee program. Specific plans also analyze infrastructure capacity and identify funding and financing mechanisms for improvements. On Fullerton's zoning map, a property covered by a specific plan has the zoning classification of Specific Plan District, or SPD, or alternatively its predecessor classification of Planned Residential Development, or PRD. The map on the screen shows the more than 20 specific plans currently adopted in the city. As you can see from the list, specific plans have been used for a variety of residential or commercial projects, as well as projects with a mix of these uses, referred to as mixed use. This slide highlights 3 residential projects built under specific plans to facilitate housing types and/or lot sizes not available under the city's Euclidean zoning-based code. These are Citrus Park on the east side of Euclid Street, south of Valencia Drive. This project includes attached single-family homes in buildings of 4 units each and small lot detached single-family homes. Legacy Walk, approved under the Roosevelt Fullerton specific plan, is west of Rosslyn Avenue, also south of Valencia Drive. This project provides small lot detached single-family homes. Lastly, Liberty Walk, approved under the Valencia Woods specific plan, is located on the north side of Valencia, east of Euclid Street. This project also includes attached single-family homes in buildings of 2 units each and small lot detached single-family homes. Overlay zones provide a layer of additional regulations that supplement the base zoning. There are 2 common purposes for an overlay zone. One is for resource protection. For example, in Fullerton, a preservation overlay zone is applied to certain single and 2-family zoned properties in neighborhoods identified as mature, where the existing housing and environment is a valuable asset to the city and should be preserved. In these areas, parcels have additional design and development standards to support the city's historic preservation goals and policies. Another purpose for overlay zones is to incentivize or otherwise regulate a specific use when and only if a property opts into the use. For example, the city has adopted an emergency shelter overlay zone. For properties with this added designation, all uses in the base zone remain permitted, plus homeless facilities. The overlay zone in this instance provides additional development and operational standards in the event the property is operated as an emergency shelter. With respect to housing, an overlay zone classification can be placed on a site not currently zoned for residential use, but one that is appropriate for such use. If and when a landowner wishes to redevelop their property, they have the option to build per the base zoning or to change to a residential use building under the relevant development standards. The overlay zone in this instance should also establish an inclusionary zoning requirement or an in-lieu fee program to ensure the provision of affordable units. The City of Fullerton currently has 4 overlay zones: the Preservation Overlay Zone, the Emergency Shelter Overlay Zone, the Pico Carhart Rural Street Overlay Zone, and the Oil Overlay Zone. Incentive zoning is a tool that is geared primarily to facilitating the production of affordable housing. When housing is already a permitted use, it provides incentives to a developer in exchange for the provision of a certain percentage of affordable units. Often the greater number of affordable units provided, the more incentives offered. Common incentives include the ability to construct more units than otherwise permitted in the zone, referred to as density bonus. Deviations from development standards, referred to as development concessions, and decreased development review time, referred to as Streamline or by right. The Fullerton Municipal Code includes the minimum density bonus and development concession provisions consistent with state law, but it does not currently include any by right development options. A key component to support by right development review is a form-based zoning code. Unlike Euclidean zoning, form-based codes prioritize the character of a building and the experience of the public realm. In other words, how the building relates not only to its site, but to its surroundings. Form-based codes do not assume buildings or districts are single use, but instead encourage multiple uses with a focus on context-sensitive design. Standards inherently address building design, removing the need for design guidelines and creating a more efficient and less costly development review process. Additionally, there is more certainty with what a project designed under form-based zoning will look like. California adopted enabling legislation in 2004 that provided cities the option to use form and design in a community's land use element and zoning ordinance. In 2016, Fullerton adopted regulations for infill projects consistent with the low-medium density community development type that are form-based, utilizing building and frontage types appropriate for the site's street typology and location relative to an existing residential neighborhood. This slide shows 3 examples of building types, including the duplex, triplex, quadplex, shopkeeper, and tuck-under types. The context-sensitive nature of form-based code is extremely important in a built-out city like Fullerton, where most properties are either developed or next to properties that are. New development in this environment is referred to as infill development. The last topic I would like to cover in the presentation is the development review process. The development review process is the way a proposed new development gets evaluated by the city. It can also be called the entitlement process because it provides an applicant with the right to develop their project. We will first talk about the traditional development review process. This is often referred to as a discretionary review process because ultimately approval of the project lies within the discretion of the final public hearing body, which for Fullerton is the Planning Commission and the City Council. Under the traditional development review process, the project is reviewed by city staff against a set of specific development standards and subjective criteria. While the development standards are specific, under a Euclidian-based zoning code, there are multiple ways these standards can be applied, leading to very different looking projects, some good and some not so good, but highly dependent on the developer's aspirations and their architect's talents. Similarly, the subjective review criteria requires interpretation by both staff and project applicant, which often leads to a difference of opinion and a negotiated resolution. For discretionary projects, an analysis is required under the California Environmental Quality Act called CEQA. Based on the scope and location of the project, it could be deemed exempt from further analysis or require analysis typically as mitigated negative declaration or environmental impact report. The next step in the traditional review process is for the project to have a public hearing or hearings depending on the type of project. The decision-making body evaluates the project, including against general plan policies, and considers the input provided by the interested public. The decision-making body may request project modifications or deny or approve the request. As you can see, the traditional development review process is uncertain, unclear, and often inefficient not only for the applicant, but also for the city staff and decision makers and the public. An alternative to the traditional process is referred to as Streamline development review. A key foundation to Streamline review is the relocation, not removal, of the public process. The public process, including the environmental review, occurs first for adoption of a plan, such as a specific plan, or regulations such as an overlay or form-based development standards. Through this process, the public and city set the clear framework under which future development could occur based on the community's aspirations. Then, when a new development is proposed, it is reviewed by city staff against a set of prescriptive development regulations which tell an applicant exactly what they must do. An example may best illustrate the difference between the prescriptive standards in the Streamline development review versus the subjective standards in the traditional development review. In the traditional development review, a project would need to be found to be creating a development that is pleasant in character and is harmonious with the past development of Fullerton, as well as the desired development character of the surrounding area. In the Streamline development review, the development standards themselves were already designed to ensure this compatibility. If the project complies with the applicable development regulations, it is approved at the staff level. The Streamlined development review process is often referred to as a by right process in that the developer's right to develop is earned through compliance with the prescriptive standards. As you can see, the Streamlined development review process provides certainty, clarity, and is more efficient for the applicant as well as the city staff and decision makers and the public. To conclude, cities have broad authority from the state to regulate use and activity within their jurisdictions, and the toolkit of regulatory and implementation mechanisms has evolved over the last 100 years. In this presentation, we learned about new tools at the city's disposal to facilitate housing production and the benefits to all involved from a streamlined development review process. We hope this presentation is helpful to provide you with land use best practices as you look at the challenges Fullerton is facing with respect to housing and land use. Thank you for listening.